Welcome to the 8th video of the HTML and CSS beginner crash course. In the previous lecture, we talked about some common values for the display property in CSS. We talked about the block display, the inline block display, and the display value of none. In this tutorial, we're going to dive into CSS Flexbox. The display property flex in CSS allows us to control the layout of the elements on the web page. And to make it understandable, we're going to be building a simple login form page to illustrate that. So let's get started. So first, I'm going to define a div, and a div with a class of container. So this is a shorthand method, div.container. And inside this div, I'm going to do a form. I'm going to just tab form.login. So form with a class of login. And for now, we don't need this action attribute, and I'm going to get rid of it. Now inside this form, I'm just going to give it a bit of room. I'm going to define the label. So we're going to just build this simple form first, and then we can use the CSS to align the elements and style it. So we're going to give a label for the username. So label for username, and it should have a value of username. And then input, the input type should be text and an ID of username, and we can give it a placeholder of tech, and we can go on. Oh, before that, let's just give it a line break, a double line break, so the password can come under. Next, we're going to do the label for the password. So label for password, and the value should be password. Then the input type should be password, and the ID password. Then we can give it a line break. And next, we're gonna do the submit button. So all we have to do is input type submit. So this is just gonna submit the form. We're gonna give it a value of login. So it's gonna display login, and an ID of login. So let's preview on the page. Now you can see we have that username, password, and the login, and this is placeholder tech. So let's go on to the CSS. So here I'm just going to target that container element. Yeah. And I'm just going to give it a border of 1px solid red. And I'm going to save, and I'm going to leave it like this for now. And let's target that form, and it has a class of login, so .login. And I'm also going to give it a border of 1px solid black. And I'm going to give it a border radius of 5px, so 5 pixels, and I'm going to give it a padding of 30 pixels, and I'm also going to give it a width of 30 viewport width. And I'm going to save. Now let's go to the browser, and now you can see the border for the container, which is the parent element, and this is for the form. The border is black here, and you can see the form here. So I want this login button to be over here. So I'm just gonna use a margin to do that. So let's just target that submit button. So I'm gonna use the hash login to target it. So why I'm using the hash login is because we have this as the ID here is login. So whenever you're selecting an ID, when you're selecting an ID in the CSS file, you use the hash. And when you're selecting a class, use the dot login. So I talked about that on the CSS selector tutorial. So we'll just go back to the previous tutorial to get a bit of insight. So I'm gonna give it a margin. I'm gonna give it a margin left. So margin left, I want it to come from the left over to here. So a margin left of 100 px, and let's preview. And now you can see it comes over there. So we can just extend it a bit. Let's say 130. Save. Now it is good here. So all we have to do now, the major target now, is to use the CSS display property of flex to center these elements, to make it stand on the center of the web page. So we're going to use that CSS display property of flex, so the Flexbox. So let's go. And to do that, we're going to do that inside this container element. And the next thing we're going to do here is display property, just like we did for the display block and inline. All we have to do is display property of flex, display flex, and then I would say justify content. There are loads of things you can use with the CSS flex, loads of properties, but we're going to use the justify content and the align item. So justify content centers the elements horizontally, while the align item centers the elements vertically. So I'm going to say justify content center, and then align item, and I'm going to say center. So there are loads of other things we can use with the dot with the CSS display property of flex. We have the justify content, we have the align items. So for the justify content, we have the justify content, space around, space between, and so many other things. But we're gonna see them as we dive along with this tutorial. When you're gonna be building a web page, you're gonna be using those stuffs. So for now, let's save and go to the browser. And now you can see this is properly sitting on the center of this web page, but I want it to actually sit down here. So all we have to do is to use the margin property. So I'm gonna do the margin here. I'm gonna give it a margin of 150 pixels. I'm gonna save, and now we can just remove this border here. So I'm just gonna comment it and save. And now we have that form properly sitting down on the center of the web page. So you can see the CSS display flex in action. So use it to get an insight. I know this form is not stylish, it's just a bit styling here. In the future tutorial, I'm going to build a standard form for you to practice with. So in the next tutorial, we're going to talk about the CSS. We are going to talk about the CSS position. So we're going to use the position to actually align an item here also to sit at the center. So whenever you want to center a div, you can use the CSS display property of flex, and you can also use the position. So you know how to do that with the flex from this tutorial. And in the next tutorial, we're going to talk about using the position to do this. But we're going to be building another project to illustrate that. So for now, we just did a form project. In the next tutorial, we're going to be building an actually different project. So I'll see you all in the next.